HDZero has announced a new Nano V2 camera that promises to offer better image quality, new features that we've all been asking for, and the same nano-sized case so you can fit it into your smaller drones. But the question is, does this new camera really live up to its promise, and is it a worthwhile upgrade from the previous HDZero Nano camera we've all been using? We're here today to figure that out. The HDZero Nano V2 has the exact same dimensions as the Nano V1, coming in at 14mm wide and 16mm tall with a weight of 4.25 grams. Just like the Nano V1, it uses an M8 lens, and that lens protrudes almost the exact same distance as the one on the Nano V1. So from the outside, these cameras are basically identical. But on the inside, there's a pretty big change. They've managed to squeeze the sensor and image processor from the HDZero Micro V2 into the smaller casing of the Nano V2, which might give this camera better image quality than the Nano V1. The Micro V2 is probably the gold standard right now for image quality on HDZero, so if this camera is a smaller Micro V2, it could be pretty exciting. I'm really interested to see how this camera performs and whether it's really better than the Nano V1. Because it uses the same internals as the Micro V2, you might recognize some of the settings, and there are some new options here that we didn't have on the Nano V1. Two things I'm particularly excited about are that we can now flip the image, and this camera also supports a 4:3 aspect ratio, which is something we've wanted to see on a nano camera for a long time. I'm going to be doing some field of view comparisons to see how that impacts things, so you'll see that later in this video. I'll mostly be using my favorite settings, which you can see on screen here. I always like to turn the saturation all the way up because I feel like the vivid colors really bring out everything the camera has to offer, and to me it just makes for a more pleasing image. But you have a lot of options here to adjust things if you prefer something different. Anyway, that's enough about settings, so let's talk about how the Nano V2 performs in the field. In general, I'm definitely impressed with the image from this camera. The colors are pleasing and mostly true to life with a slightly warm color temperature that really reminds me of the colors from the Micro V2. I'm happy with the level of detail and sharpness in the image, especially in high texture areas like grass and trees. As a whole, it's an easy camera to fly with, and I find myself enjoying what I see. There's nothing here that really distracts me or bothers me during flight. But if we really want to understand how the camera performs, we need to compare it to the other HDZero cameras, and that's what we're going to do in most of this review. I've definitely noticed some interesting things about how the Nano V2 compares to the rest of the lineup, so I'm going to show you some side-by-side shots while we talk about those things. We'll start with some flights in ideal conditions, and then I'll show you a few edge cases that I found really interesting. I'm going to start by comparing it to the HDZero Nano V1. And I do want to say that I've been really happy with the V1, and I've logged a lot of flight time on that camera since it came out. It has great image quality, and there really wasn't much I could say against it when I reviewed it last year. But it's surprising to compare it with this new camera and see where it falls short. In these shots, you can see that the colors on the V2 are more saturated and more varied than the V1. The V2 also has noticeably more detail in the image, both at a distance and close up. These cameras both produce a great image, but I think the V2 is notably better. Another interesting comparison is against the HDZero Nano Lite, which is another brand new camera made for the smallest and lightest builds. In this case, the colors are very similar between the cameras, but you can see that the larger lens on the Nano V2 is giving us a more clear image with much less haze than the Nano Lite. Although the Nano Lite has key advantages in size and weight, the Nano V2 is undoubtedly a better performer. I also thought it'd be fun to compare against the original orange Runcam Nano HD. I remember back when I reviewed that camera, I was happy with the image with it at the time, but it's a little hard to look at now. There's not much to say here. We've come a really long way with these HDZero cameras, and if you're still using one of those orange Runcams, you'll find the Nano V2 to be a massive upgrade. So ideal conditions are great, but we don't always fly in ideal conditions, and I often feel like the edge cases are where we really see what a camera's made of. The first one I want to cover is blown out highlights, like if you fly directly toward the sun. This is something that comes up a lot during flying, and it really has an effect on how well you can see where you're going. The Nano V2 does a great job of handling this situation, and I have no trouble seeing any of these areas in front of me. Even compared to the Nano V1, you can see that the V2 is doing a better job at showing me a clear image across the entire frame. And compared to the Nano Lite, it's no contest. The V2 is just giving me more information about the darker areas and making it easier to fly in this spot. I also wanted to compare against the Nano V1 in an area with shadows. This is one of the only things that I had really called out on the Nano V1. That camera had noticeable noise in darker areas of the image. It wasn't just shadows. You can see it in any dark area of the image, and I could always see this in my goggles, so I did notice it during flight. Looking at the comparison with the Nano V2, I was really impressed with how much better the V2 handles this situation. And as you might expect, night flying is a similar story. The Nano V2 is actually an excellent night performer and easily the best HDZero Nano camera I've tested in the dark. Compared to the Nano V1, you can see how much cleaner and less noisy the V2 image is, which directly translates to increased visibility. It can actually get better than this too. The Nano V2 has a max gain setting, which gives you a bit more brightness in the dark. But if you're in a well-lit area like I am in this parking lot, you can turn that setting off and get even less noise. You'll also notice that the lights don't flare with max gain off, so this is just a better image overall. Now I do have to give some props to the Nano V1 because the one advantage it does have at night is the colors. When I'm flying down in the parking lot, you can see better colors on the trees from the V1. This is a bit of a trade-off because I think the V2 image is less distracting to fly with. You have to pick what's more important to you. Compared to the Nano Lite, the Nano V2 is the clear winner in the dark. The image has better colors, more contrast, and more sharpness. All of these HDZero Nano cameras are at least acceptable in the dark, but the V2 is going to be the best option in most cases. And finally, the last thing I wanted to cover about the performance of the Nano V2 is the field of view. We're going to go pretty fast in this section, so feel free to pause the video if you want to review any of these comparisons more closely. For all of these tests, the race gate is about 8 feet from the camera, and the inner hole of that gate has a diameter of 2 feet. The Nano V2 adds a 4x3 option, which noticeably increases the vertical field of view compared to the 16:9 mode while keeping the horizontal field of view the same. Interestingly, both of these modes offer the same field of view as the Micro V2 camera. So even though this camera has a smaller lens, you get the same field of view as the larger micro camera. The Nano V2 does have a more pronounced fisheye effect, which makes the edges of the image more distorted than the straight lines on the Micro V2. This is almost certainly a side effect of the Nano V2 using a smaller lens that's still wide enough to match that field of view from the bigger camera. I haven't really noticed this in flight, but some of you will, and it's an interesting thing to point out. Comparing to the Nano V1, that camera only has a 16:9 mode. The field of view in that 16:9 mode on both cameras is very similar, but you do see a similar difference in the fisheye distortion. The lens on the V1 is more rectilinear and doesn't have as much of that distortion as you see on the V2. There's one last thing to mention here, which is that they've added a new 16:9 full aspect ratio option. That setting uses the entire area of the 16:9 sensor, so it gives you the widest possible image. You can see the trade-off here. So this image has an even wider field of view, but part of the sensor is outside the image circle of the lens, so it's kind of like looking through a porthole. Now, you might be able to make better use of this mode if you can find a wider angle M8 lens, or you can just deal with the vignetting on the edges. It's an interesting addition to the camera, and I'm curious to see what people end up doing with that. So that is a lot of information about how the Nano V2 performs, and the only thing left to talk about is whether you should buy it. The current HDZero camera lineup has 3 cameras that each use the same sensor but with different trade-offs for different uses. The Nano V2 fits right in the middle of this lineup, and it really seems like a great all-around choice for an HDZero build. But let's compare it to some of your other options. First, if you're comparing it to the Micro V2, I think it really just comes down to the size and whether your drone frame or canopy is designed for a micro camera or a nano camera. These two cameras have extremely similar performance, and it's close enough that I'd decide based on which one you can mount more easily in your frame of choice. If you're comparing against the Nano Lite, it's all about weight. The Nano Lite is about 2.5 grams lighter than the Nano V2, and for the lightest whoops and micros, that could be a make or break difference in how your build performs. But there is a trade-off for that lighter weight on the Nano Lite. You've seen a few comparisons in this video where the image quality and performance of the Nano Lite just isn't as good as what we're seeing from the Nano V2. The Nano Lite is a tool made for a specific job, and it does that job really well, but I'd pick the Nano V2 if it fits into your weight budget. And finally, we have the Nano V1. This is maybe the most relevant one for you guys who already have that camera and you're wondering if you should upgrade. And it's mostly kind of hard to say. You've seen a lot of comparison footage in this review, and I think the Nano V2 is clearly the better camera. But I never want to be one of those YouTubers who always tells you that you need to have the latest thing and that you're going to fly better or be happier with a new product. The Nano V1 was a great camera when it released last fall, and it's still a great camera for HDZero. Will you see an improvement with the Nano V2? Yeah, I think you would appreciate the upgrade, but you'll have to decide if the difference is enough to be worth it to you. Personally, I'll be buying the V2 for new builds, but I'll still be using my existing Nano V1s. Oh, and there is one last camera. If you have the orange Runcam Nano HD, should you upgrade to the Nano V2? Yes, you should. Alright guys, that's going to do it for this one. I hope you found this useful, and if there's anything you'd like to see me test on this camera that I didn't cover, let me know down in the comments. I'd be happy to do a follow-up on this if you guys can think of some more situations you'd like to see these cameras tested in, or if you're curious about any of the settings and how they work. Also, keep your eyes open for an upcoming review on the HDZero Nano Lite camera, and make sure you're subscribed to my channel so you don't miss that one. But thank you guys for watching this video, and I'll see you in the next one.